respect to the men and women who serve us in uniform around the globe, here in town and around the country. Thank you. Be seated. Commissioner Bovee may be late this evening if he's able to arrive at all. He had a family emergency to take care of, so we won't be waiting for him. We have no old business to cover, so we'll go into public session. Tonight's guests are Susan Hickey, the Assistant Town Manager for Finance and Administration, and Peter Currow, the School District Business Administrator. This is part of continuing educational meetings that we're having here with the Charter Commission, and we're talking about budgeting and the default budget. We have other guests that will be coming in the next couple of meetings, and then we will get around to taking our first initial vote on which direction the Commission will head with its report. So, Susan and Peter, we didn't really ask you guys to prepare any specific thing, but you're the recognized experts in towns on budgeting, on one side budgeting, and then on the other side budgeting in the default budget. Should the town make a change, the Commission recommend a change and the voters approve a change to SB2, something will happen on the town side that has not happened in the past, and that will be default budgets. So we'd really like to just have you guys give us a quick overview on, and maybe start with Susan first, Peter, and talk about budgeting, and then have Peter follow in with the default budget so that we get a better understanding up here. And what we're looking to do is we're collecting information, and then we will write a lot of this type of information into the report that we give that will go up for the town council and then ultimately be put in front of the voters. Along the way, if anybody has any questions, if you could wait till an opportune time to ask your question, and then I'd like to remind everybody to at least raise your hand, call, wave if you have to get my attention if I'm looking the other way. Let me call on you so we don't talk over each other. We had a little bit of a problem with that last meeting, and as a result, the minutes were a little bit difficult to keep track of, especially last meeting we had no benefit of tape. So this week we've got at least the meeting taped. Susan.
So are you looking, Brian, to get an overview of the process that we go through internally, or more with the council level?
The process internally and a little bit of the council level, if you could just talk to the, a little bit about the schedule of activities.
Sure. So starting all the way at the beginning?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Our process begins really in August, preparing a lot of the HR functions, salary, health insurance, that sort of thing. That gets done with the department heads, looking at all the different union contracts and that sort of thing, taking into account union negotiations. From there, we key it into our system. Each department head enters their own information based on contracts that they may have in play with different vendors, based on expenses that they've incurred last year. So they'll look at last 5 years actually for trend analysis for budget and actual. So they'll make their projections at that point. Once that's done, it gets all combined into one budget, which gets presented to the town manager. By this point, it's probably September, mid-September timeframe. Manager goes through, meets with different department heads, getting some rationale and some explanation for different line items that there may be in some question. Manager's given a directive by the town council during their goal-setting process, which is usually an April timeframe. So knows what budget the council wants to see, brings the budget in, makes any recommendations, makes any cuts that need to be made at that point, gets put into one big budget again called the town manager's budget, which then gets presented to the town council usually mid-October. From that point, we go through the process of public hearings and budget sessions, which are usually mid-October through January. In January, we begin our public hearing process. We have 2 public hearings in January, including bonds, 1 public hearing in February, and then it wraps up with town meeting in March. So that's the process that we go through.
Any questions for Susan? No?
I mean, you're pretty much set in stone under the RSAs, right, on your deadlines, and then you back it up towards all them. Everything's already pretty much done
Yeah, that's
as far
between
as your
RSAs and our
dates and
charter.
everything. Okay.
Yep. Yeah, it states how many days, 100 days from town meeting, we have to have certain public hearings done and that sort of thing. So we'd count the days from town meeting and go backwards from there.
So some of those sections of the charter are the sections that we would report out requiring a change if we were going to go to recommending SB2. So that would change the calendar somewhat on the town side, mindful, of course, of there are RSA impacts to the same thing.
Really, the tail end, Brian, the tail end of her calendar would be the part that gets affected the most.
And so, Peter, maybe you can walk through that part, because the school district does follow that sort of tailoring guideline with the SB2, and maybe if you could walk us through that part to highlight the deliberative session and how that plays into the budget schedule and where the school district starts.
First of all, we do really two budgets. First one we'll call the superintendent's budget. Pretty much take Susan's process, substitute the words town manager and superintendent, and that's probably the same thing. We have our goals. In fact, the school district has a 5-year rolling strategic plan, which 9/10 of requests that get rolled up into the superintendent's budget can be pulled right off the strategic plan of that particular year. Aside from that, it's the same process that Susan did. We look at enrollment. Obviously, they don't have enrollment. They look at their service levels and demands. We look at enrollment, and we make adjustments for the superintendent's budget based on enrollment, based on state minimum standards if they have changed, based on state law if they've now required a new program for us that's mandated, those kind of issues. Those get rolled up. Same process as Susan. The superintendent's budget gets delivered to the school board, usually the board meeting before Thanksgiving, usually around the middle of January. We have our public hearings, usually around February 5th, thereabouts. I think it's the first. In the law, it tells you dates from town meeting. You go back, it's the third, it's like the first, between the first and second Saturday of January. It's those kind of dates. It's all specific in the law as to when you have your deliberative session, and then we vote on all our articles on the Tuesday, the official ballot. Unlike the town, which on Tuesday they vote on capital, bonds, in elections, and then the subsequent Saturday is the operating budget. For the school district, on that Tuesday, it's the elected officials, bonds and notes, operating budget, trust funds, and any other articles that would make up the appropriations for the school budget. Then we calculate what's called the default budget. So when we present the budget book to the superintendent, to the school board, it's the superintendent's proposal and the default budget as calculated by myself. And, well, now it's Lisa McKinney, used to be Anita Treelaw. And so, if nothing else, the school board uses the default budget as a guide as to current budget, plus or minus contracts, obligations, debt, and other stuff. So I can get into what the default budget more in 2 seconds. But those are the two budgets. When we give the book to the school board, you have those, actually you have three. You'll have the department head's request, superintendent's budget, and then you have the default budget.
So that's really the break point between the school district and the town side, is we have a department head request and we have the manager's budget.
Right,
That's what's presented to the town council.
which is what we do.
Yeah.
Same process, but then we have a default budget also.
Are those presented in sort of the same tables, just a different column, or is it
Yeah.
actually a separate part of
Yep.
the book?
No, you'll have one page. It'll say, department budget, or administration budget, we call it.
Yeah.
Superintendents, we'll have a board column, which will be 0, obviously, until they vote. And then we have default budget. And the default budget doesn't change.
Okay.
So once the default budget's calculated, anything from there on, decisions made by the board to add this, delete that, move this, or whatever, the default budget stays the same.
Any questions for Peter?
Is he gonna go into the default
Yeah,
budget
I will in a
on
minute.
what's there and why
This is a good
it's more
break point, though,
expensive?
for any questions up to this point.
So Peter, the default budget is just actually the operating budget of the school It's not like all the bonds and
Correct.
all of the other stuff.
You're talking
that-
default budget, it's what we call the general operating budget. Trust funds are not included. Capital reserves, not included. Any so-called special articles, and by law, there's five of them, right? Trusts, special articles, recurring contracts, something else. Those are automatically not considered your operating budget. In the end of the day, when we go to DRA and we set the tax rate, they all get rolled into appropriations, revenues minus appropriations for the tax rate. But when you're talking general budget, trust funds are out, bonds are out, union contracts are out.
Separate and special.
Yeah, separate article, like, for example, if the town does it a lot more than the school, but if the town wanted to show something separate for the voters to see clearly that, the town wants to do this, buy land, let's say, I think land's by law, but they want to buy a piece of land, they would pull it out separate, away from the operating budget. That's not included in the default budget. And then you've got articles that you have 3 years to draw down. You got $100,000, you've got 3 years to spend the $100,000. Those are out of bounds of when we call it the default budget or the general operating budget.
Chris?
When did you say the public hearings start? It was February, you said?
For the school district?
Yeah.
The public hearings for the school district start December, the first 3 weeks in December. When I say public hearings, Superintendent Greenberg presents a budget, make it up, $60 million. That's the Tuesday before Thanksgiving normally. We have that week, Thanksgiving break, we come back the following Tuesday. We usually have 4 meetings where usually it's myself, Superintendent Greenberg, and whatever department head, high school principal, middle school principal, so forth. And we walk our way through the major sections of the budget. So usually the first night, it's personnel, and the way Nate goes through personnel, it's the only thing we get through. Then we have special education, which is a big chunk and a lot of discussion because of the complexities with special ed. And usually we may sneak one more thing in there that night. The third meeting is pretty much curriculum, library, and the building budgets. And to be honest with you, when we say building budgets, personnel takes care of all the salaries and benefits of the whole district. So when you talk about North School, South School, Matthew Thornton School, you're down to pencils and paper by the time you throw out salaries and benefits and the teachers. And then the fourth meeting is what we call the operations side. We'll talk about the business aspect. We'll talk about buildings and grounds, food service, technology. And then usually the fifth one is open for discussion. Usually it's the board and the budget committee asking questions. What did you mean by this? Can't we do this differently? That kind of thing. And by then, you're pretty much chewed up January. You might have one more budget depending on how things go. And the deliberative session is usually, I think the deliberative session is something like in between the last and first Saturday of the last Saturday of January, first Saturday of February. It's like that kind of a time frame in the budget.
But there's about 2 months there that the public's able to put their input in the
Yeah.
budget. Yeah.
And then you have the deliberative session, which is after you have a formal budget where the school board has presented all the articles. Then you have the deliberative session, which again, it's like one more bite at the apple, provided that there's a quorum to look at and review the entire warrant. And then after whatever gets voted on or whatever actions taken at the deliberative session, then gets placed on the ballot. So from there, all discussion's done. Obviously, I'm not trying to be funny, there's no discussion at the ballot box. You say, I agree with it, or I don't agree.
And how does that differ from the town? I mean, how much input can people give before the actual, it's cast in stone?
For us, our public, we have public sessions where, the same as Peter departments present information, and the public, of course, is welcome to come to those. We do, this past year, we started doing an all-day Saturday, so we have all departments present in one day instead of doing it multiple, 5 nights, 5 Monday nights in a row. We do it on a Saturday, so departments present, public's welcome to come. Sometimes they ask questions. They have meetings with the council and the budget committee, same as Peter, to ask different questions, ask us to get more information back to them. At that point, our true public hearings, which are posted specifically for the public to ask questions, we have 2 in January, including a bond hearing, and then we have 1 in February, which is like our final, kind of like Peter's deliberative session. It's a final, everybody's gotten everything, all the questions have been answered, and it's a final public hearing on the budget at that point. And that's right around February 9th, February 8th, right around there.
Yeah, the big difference between the official ballot and, I'll use the form, real town meeting, is at the deliberative session, you are voting to move things to the ballot. Technically, you're not voting on dollars at that point. You're simply moving amendments, either amending articles up and down, but you're not voting on the final budget or final appropriation. It goes to the ballot. Whereas a town meeting, people get up and they'll ask for information and they'll make motions to the budget. I mean, for example, 2 years ago, I made a motion to add X dollars for the white lines that you see in the roads. You don't have that. You don't, at the final point of where the appropriation is been approved by the voters, you don't have that on the school side. You just go to the ballot box and a yes or no. On the town side, you have that town meeting. At the point where it becomes an official appropriation, you can get up and argue or make a motion to the budget or whatever.
Al?
All right, now, thank you, Peter, for your input. Now, isn't it a deliberative session, if 500 people showed up, then they have the power to do that?
Yeah, you have the power to amend articles, but again, you're amending articles, but the final vote for the appropriation is still that Tuesday in March.
Right, follow up?
Yeah.
See what I'm saying?
Right, I understand what you're saying, but isn't that, the way the school does it, isn't that for the good of the people and the absentee people, isn't that the right way to go because I'm surprised, the 500 quorum, we're one of the very few towns in the state that makes it hard on the school side to make any changes. Very few in the whole state that do what we do here in Londonderry with 500 quorum. So that's a tough one. But if the town had no quorum or something like that in a deliberative session, wouldn't it be business as usual as a town meeting, deliberative session, same thing? But the only thing is everybody gets to say a say instead of 250 that show up?
Well, you're asking for my opinion now.
Yes. With your experience, your opinion.
The problems I've heard with the deliberative session, which is the official ballot, is people say, well, they're not making decisions tonight. That's done at the ballot. So why do I go to the deliberative session? I'll just wait to the ballot, and then if I think 60 million for schools too much, or what I'm just talking, I'll vote no. Or the operating budget for the town, I'll vote no. So if you look around the town, you don't get very many people going to the deliberative session because they're not making final decisions that night. The final decision is in March or whatever. So that's why you're not getting a lot of people statewide, from what I'm hearing, both town and school, why people don't show up at the deliberative session. You're right when you say you'll get more people voting on a Tuesday with the official ballot. And you're right, like, my kid now is now military, so if we stay the same, he won't have the opportunity to vote on the town side because there's no absentee ballot for the official town meeting. He can, by absentee ballot, vote on whatever the ballot is on Tuesday. You're correct there.
Maybe just a follow-up.
Yeah.
One of the other issues that I wondering on, which makes sense to me, the state does their budget February, March timeframe, which affects the towns, every town in the state. What I'm wondering why, and I'm hoping that maybe we do something like this in our town, because right now we have the cart in front of the horse. We're doing the budget, then the state later on does that, and then our numbers all will change depending what comes down the pike. why do, in the deliberative session, when we choose like an April or a May, in accordance with the RSA, when it's there and we're authorized to do something like that, and then we would have true numbers?
You could. The problem you run into is if you don't have a budget passed, and then you run into May, and you don't have a budget passed, you run the risk of opening up the year without a budget. And that's why a lot of your towns switched from a January to December calendar year budget. Some of the small ones still do, but most, I'd say medium to large, all went to a July 1st fiscal year. Because it's very difficult to open up a fiscal year not knowing what your budget is. Some towns do. I think Merrimack has a May town meeting, May budget meeting. I think part of it's tradition. I think part of it is the March timeframe gives ample time that if something does go wrong, you don't get a budget for whatever reason, you've got ample time to hold a series of other hearings and get a budget done. For those that run in January, when they have their budgets in March, they don't sleep because they are spending money that they don't know they have until the March meeting. So it is really difficult to open up a fiscal year not knowing how much money you got.
Steve?
Yeah, and on that issue, the state budget really isn't reconciled until June 30th. That's when they come out and they finally put and sometimes not till the middle of July if the governor decides not to sign the legislation. So I just can't imagine we would wait till the middle of July to, get around all that.
You'd be running town government or school government, but town government for a month, not knowing exactly. So you could see Janos being held back, for example. I'll use an example, because he's the one that spends the most money in summer. If I was, well, I was in her shoes, but if I was on the town side and didn't have a budget, I'd be pulling him back until a budget's passed so I know what money I got left.
So I would imagine you'd hold off on like routine annual school maintenance in the school district. You'd hold off on that in the
Where I am
summertime,
now,
which is the prime time to do a lot of that.
Right, trust funds are different, so they're
Trust funds,
okay.
if it's
Well,
in a trust fund, that's
Actually,
fine.
no, because they wouldn't be voted yet, so I wouldn't know if I would know in this case, if we did, something happened and we didn't have an official ballot in May and we waited till July or late June, I wouldn't have a trust fund that I know I could count on. And then, to be honest, right now, Chuck and I, we're all done planning for summer projects. I mean, we start our summer projects planning pretty much January, February. You got to line up bids, you got to line up advertisement, you got to line up vendors, you got to write the specs. So we're pretty much all ready to go now. We get held up, we'll miss the window. And don't laugh, but Londonderry isn't the only school that doesn't have school in the summer. They all, as you know, don't have school. So everybody's doing maintenance and painting and paving in the summer.
Lara, you had a,
Well, I just wanted to clarify, the hearings, the public hearings, the public can listen and they can make a comment, but there's no changes or anything that they can be made. Everything's already set in stone?
yeah, I'll clarify that.
Okay.
There's two things that go on. They often get labeled as public hearings. There's public sessions,
Okay,
which all budget discussions on the school district and the town are done in public session.
okay,
Some of them are, and it's usually the last couple, are posted public hearings, where the town council or the school board will take their final votes on what's gonna go forward to the next step. So there's no opportunity really at a public session or public hearing for the public to put through a change, other than through influence, trying to influence the mind of the school board or trying to influence the mind of the town council as to what their thoughts are. So they can come in and they can sit in the audience and they can say, I think you really ought to be looking at increasing the budget at the library by X thousand dollars or whatever, because we need more of something. So people could come in a public session or public hearing and advocate for that, and the council could take it up and actually make a change.
Okay, okay.
But it's the people up here who do the change at that time.
Like I said, but that's one of the key differences between the official ballot that the school has and what the town has. Because the point that Brian just made, a resident can come in and plead to the school board to whatever, to do X. If the school board feels, for whatever reason, that they're right, the school board's right, they hold on to it. If you go to deliberative session, they have a shot at that point to go up to, but if there's no quorum, at least for us, there's no public discussion. At town meeting, you gotta remember, the people who attend town meeting are the legislative body for the town for that day. So I, for example, didn't have to convince the council to paint white lines along the roads. I had to convince the 400 people that behind me that it was a good idea to spend your money to put these white lines for safety. And the council, all 5 of them, could have said, we don't want to spend $5,000. We worked hard, and they do, and the school board does too, to get to a number. But if I can convince the majority of people behind me to put $5,000 in, it gets passed.
Or cut it, or
Or up and down, right.
Steve, and then I'll come down.
I have two areas of question. Let me cover one first. On the default budget, you said that you come up with the default budget. What gives you the right to do that, or what guidelines do you follow, and does anybody make sure that you're doing it right?
There's a law that's called, in the official ballot law, RSA 4013, there's general guidelines of a default budget. And when the default budget was being discussed, as president of GFOA that year, we were meticulously involved in what the default budget process was. So I can say that I may not be an expert in the default budget, but I know I actually helped, I think, chart part of the discussion. When I say I calculate the default budget with the accountant, pass it to the superintendent for his review, and then it goes on the page for the school board. Now, the school board has, I'll use the word, the final say of the default budget. It is up to the local governing body to calculate the default budget. So as staff of the school, it is as the business administrator of the school district, it's been given my duty to calculate the school district's default budget on an annual basis for you being a school board member.
So does anyone from the state check your work?
No. No, in 2 accounts. Remember, we as a school district are not an official SB2 town or school district. We follow the SB2 rules. So on one end, because we're not an official SB2 town, they wouldn't check ours. But as you know, in your budget book, there is a state form that is required by official SB2 towns or school districts. And we chose to fill that form out and to submit that form so that there's no reason of doubt that we're not following the rules of an official SB2 town or school district, just because it's a charter.
When it goes to DRA for final tax, to set the taxes, do they check it?
Don't know. I don't know. I could ask. I don't. And keep in mind, it gets filed to them, and I don't know if they check it. But to your point, what is checked is what budget actually got approved by the voters.
This will sound like a negative term, and I don't mean it as such, but in what ways can we manipulate the default budget? And so that that's not misconstrued, let me give an example. if we were to change from leasing items or not leasing items, would that change the default budget? And if so, why?
It could, because the main purpose of the default budget, well, let me give you what the default budget is. The default budget, in layman terms, is the current operating budget. It gets back to current operating budget, so trusts and all that are excluded. Current operating budget, plus or minus contractual obligations. Here, default budget is used in this subdivision means the amount of the same appropriation as contained in the operating budget authorized for the previous year. So when we're doing default budget next year, we use FY11's approved operating budget. Reduced and increased, as the case may be, by debt service. Now, I know debt service because that's the one I put in. Debt service is the easiest one. You got a debt schedule, a principal and interest, and they have to be paid. That's the only thing the DRA can change on their own, because they require that the debt be paid by each subdivision. So
Peter?
number one,
Peter, can we walk through these one at a time? Because I think there might be a couple of questions on the
Yep.
debt service part.
okay,
And some of it, I think, I just want to make sure everybody understands that. If there were bonds approved for the FY11 spending, then the debt service would be going up,
right.
potentially. If there were bonds that were being paid off, the debt service would potentially be falling as a
Right.
result. So you'd see.
There's no new debt. Normally, 9.5 out of 10 times, your debt would drop by, because you'd be paying less interest. Sometimes drastically, if a principal is done, 20-year note comes to the end, that's a drastic drop in your principal amount. But usually, you're stepping down on interest payments each year. Okay, so maybe up or down by debt service, contracts, and other obligations previously incurred or mandated by law and reduced by one-time expenditures contained in the operating budget. So, for the school district, we have debt, we have contracts for union salaries. The contracts, union salaries incur, and also have some kind of benefits attached to them. Okay, we have contracts for our utilities. Okay, we have contract for our software maintenance. Okay, we're mandated by law to provide minimum standards for education. We're required by law to provide some special education. So one of the areas that we will move up and down on the school side with the default budget is the calculated cost of out-of-district placements. They could go up, they could go down. And what we do is we use the current population of out-of-district placements and anybody else that's going to be approved by July 1st. And that number is in there as an up and down because we're obligated to cover those costs. So that's pretty much how we get to our debt service. One-time expenditure, I'll give you an example. We buy all new furniture for the SAU office, okay?
You guys do that every year, right?
Yeah. And let's just say it's $50,000 just for discussion. So the following year, when we're doing a default budget, that $50,000 of the current operating budget comes out of the default budget. That's a one-time expenditure that was done to renovate the SAU office or whatever. That would come out as an automatic, considered one-time expenditure. If you buy, a couple of years ago, she bought a computer system software, New Horizons, some odd $1,000 of new software. That would come out as a one-time expenditure on the operating budget. If we were to buy new equipment meaning we have 50 chairs in this room, and we added 10 last year to make it 60. That 60, that the 10 would come out, that's new, would come out. We have in our budget every year a line item for replacement equipment. That's a recurring expense. Every year, we're obligated to have safe desks, safe chairs, so forth and so on. So if Matthew Thornton had $5,000 of replacement equipment, okay, and they wanted 10 for next year, the fall budget would have 5, and 10 would be a new expense, if I can use that phrase.
Peter. So the default budget is what your is the starting point is what you expended your previous year. So,
Starting point.
so to make it simple, if the school district spent $59 million last year to run their whole business, the default budget is $59 million, then you start adding in the debt service, the contracts, and what else? What else am I missing? Debt service
Well,
contract.
debt service, the union contracts, bargaining units.
So benefits and all of that
Benefits,
stuff that goes along
Utilities,
with
because we
it.
contract the utilities.
So it would be the appropriated amount for that, not necessarily what you spent.
Appropriate amount, correct.
If you saved, for some reason, if you saved, 75,000 because of something you didn't do, that was an appropriated amount.
Correct.
That would still be in there. Steve,
Right.
did that answer your lease-related question? Because I think you're driving to a certain,
Yeah, you didn't discuss leases. I guess simply, the leases are a contract. So if the district.
Leases are debt.
Yes, and they're a contract for a set period of time.
Yes.
So if the district chooses to, and let's say the district, I'll talk in the district in this case, it leases bleachers. And if it leases those bleachers, they're part of the default budget.
Yes.
If the district every year makes a practice of purchasing bleachers, then that's not part of the default contract.
Right.
So in order to roll a budget so that your default budget is higher, if you look to make sure that those items are in contracts, then your default budget would be higher. I'm trying to think of an example on the town side.
police cars.
Police cars would be one.
Yep, police cars would be a good one, because they're on a rolling budget, so you would always have to have police cars. If a council came through and said, no, from now on, we're going to purchase police cars with cash every 3 years on a rolling budget, in that case, they wouldn't be part of default budget. So in such my term manipulation,
Could be. If the council made a policy that they were going to purchase, that they wanted to have a fleet of, how many you got now? Say 20. Make it easy, 21.
20 times 2.
21. Let's say they have 21 cars, and they've made a policy that they wanted to have the cars every 3 years rolled over. Could be default budget, because it's a policy, and it's now become a recurring expense, not a one-time expense. I said could be. I didn't say it is or isn't.
Steve, I think I see the point you're talking about, how you could manipulate, and maybe it's better to look at, there's some strategic decision-making that could go on that would impact how you did this, the consistency in those strategies, like you talked about, Peter. If you made a decision to do purchasing on a recurring 3-year rotational type thing, that's your strategic decision. If you stayed with that, and that would be something people would expect, then you'd see a standardized way of approaching a default budget.
Because it says recurring,
But
so
you could play with that. Some people might have a tendency to play with that a little bit.
keep in mind, the keyword's recurring, previous year. So if you're buying police cruisers every year,
You only want to buy one
that
of
could
those.
become a reoccurring expense, because
Yeah.
it's going on and on.
Chris, you had a question over here?
Yeah, are the one-time expenses itemized out when you do the default?
Define itemized out. We
your
don't show,
one-time-
we don't, when we do the fall budget, we don't say to the school board, we pull this out, pull that out, and pull that out. We just calculate the default budget.
You don't provide a report that shows what the one-time expenses were? Okay. Al?
Peter, thank you. Some good information. I'd like to learn more later on about that we're not official SB2 under what RSA, so I can read and look up what is not official SB2, because I'm a little confused on that.
Oh, very simple.
No, I won't get into
Oh,
that.
it's very simple. If you have a charter, which we do, then you're either a charter, organization, or your official ballot. Pure and simple. Pure and simple.
Okay, so the chart, so we have, I never ever even knew the school had a chart. I gotta look at that one of these days. But anyways, my question is, under the appropriations, I mean, I'm looking under 32:3. Last year's budget which goes forward in the default, don't you already have the lease payments in that budget? Don't you already have all other payments already in there? So everything stays in place. So there's no other payments that get added on in lease equipment, because it's already in that budget.
Right, but what we're saying is, if the school budget's $59 million, okay? And at the same year, they decided, in this case, the last one, we decided to renovate South School. The year that bond kicks in, that debt service, the principal would go up about 250. The interest, I believe, went up something like around 175. So our debt went up $350,000 because a new bond or a new project hit. Now, we don't do anything for 15 years. Every year, our debt is going to drop on a step scale down to never nothing, but it will drop down. And then it only goes up when we issue a new note for a new project.
I understand that fully, but what I'm trying to get at here is your contract obligations on bonds, your contract obligations on utilities, everything are already lined item in your regular budget. That was, and so that default will already just have those numbers. What I'm trying to figure out, what else is above?
Well, don't forget
Because those
default.
numbers are already in that
When I say
budget.
default, what we do is, we calculate, as you know, Chuck can tell you down to the kilowatt hour, how many kilowatts we use on a given year. So if, for FY '10 budget, I'm just making this up, kilowatt hour was a penny, okay? We budget a penny a kilowatt hour. As we're doing FY '11 budget, if our contract is 1.5 cents a kilowatt, we calculate what we think we're gonna need for kilowatt hours and multiply it by 1.5 cents.
So the contracts can have escalation rates, escalation
Yeah,
factor.
but it's not
The
a
lease on a
dollar, it's
vehicle,
like-
the lease on something.
We
could
need to
be-
have, we expect to use 1 million kilowatt hours of electricity. And our contract says, for FY '11, it's 1.5 cents, okay? 1 million kilowatt hours times 1.5 cents, that's the number we use
In the default.
for the electricity spread out among the buildings, for power.
And that's for the default, Al.
Right. I'm very familiar here with the default and with the thing, but what I'm trying to figure out here is, but meanwhile, most of the money that is already in your last year's budget. And that's, so the default budget should maybe be a couple dollars more if you're going with, because if I'll use the number like 1,000 kilowatts this year, and you think maybe you're gonna be open 3, 4, 5 more days next year, so maybe you might use another 50. So it'll be versus just 50 kilowatt cost in the default, not the whole 1,050, because you're already contracted, it's already in your budget, right? Because we're gonna use the same numbers in the default. Am I missing something here?
I think so, because when you do the default budget, you start from scratch.
Well, why does the order, I'm looking at the law, and it says right here, your appropriation came to an operating budget authorized for the previous year. Your same numbers from the previous year.
Okay, so what we would do is, we would go back to how we calculated electricity for FY '10. And we went back and we said, we estimated 950 hours of kilowatt hours for when we did in FY '10. But what are we using this year, Chuck? According to the formula he's got, the emergency management, we're gonna use another we're gonna use 950 or thereabouts, my best guess, okay? And but not a penny, it's $1.50. I mean, a penny, 1.5 cents. So when we do the FY '11 default budget, it would be 950 kilowatt hours times a penny and a half. That's the number that gets put in. You're right, it might be a little bit higher based from the previous year. But I'm just telling you that that's how we calculate the default budget for the utilities.
I think I can maybe simplify a little bit
No,
too.
no, let me cover this because I think it's important. You picked a great example, because you said if the school's gonna stay open for 5 more days. If the default budget got voted in, the school could not stay open for 5 more days. However, the school would be able to pay the increase of 1.5 cents per kilowatt hour over the 1 cent per kilowatt hour last year. They wouldn't be able to stay open any longer. They would have to close.
So,
Or find another way to pay for it.
if I may finish. So what I'm trying to get at, so the only difference, I mean, you don't take that money back out of that previous budget that's already budgeted for your, because all that's staying there. So you'll only go up a few dollars here and there.
Okay, yeah.
Well, that's what I'm trying to get at. So anything else that you're in contractual that has gone up would be above and beyond.
Yes.
But then when you go to the other section of paragraph B, contracts are in the default. You can add in the contracts on the, on the changes. So this is why I'm wondering
Yeah,
how
so-
this would,
so
the
the-
issue is, and I still can't figure out why they were a lot higher, because it's.
So the simple thing is you have to look at the fact that 80% of the budget, 80 to 83, is staffing. And this year, we just approved some increases in those salaries. So, the next couple of years, because it's a 3-year contract, the next couple of years, you'd expect to see those increases in the default budget because the voters approved them. So if it was, if you had
And-
a particular person whose salary was, and we'll just say $100,000, make it simple math, and there was a 3% increase per year, you'd see that person go to 103, then 1048, or whatever the
Right,
heck
yeah,
it
go
is,
up
and
a
you'd
few
see the
dollars.
escalation over
Plus
the 3
others.
years.
Plus taxes.
Plus,
Right,
plus,
taxes, Social
plus, if
Security.
there was a change in social security, if there was a change in the insurance rate for that person.
Retirement, healthcare,
So
dental. Right.
all of those things become additive, and all of those things would be legitimate adds to the default budget. That's why you see it
Right.
grow.
I'll give you an example. When we calculate the health insurance costs for the district, we cut the population at September 30th. So we use September 30th population to know how many employees are on family, two-person, and single plans. Okay? And then at the outset, we know what trend is, because we'll go to LGC or school care, and they'll say, you're looking at about a 10% increase. So we take that population, and we add 10% to the premiums for the various plans, and for the outstart, we plug that number in. And usually for us, we get LGC and school care's final numbers before we're done. And if it was 9%, let's say, we'll make the adjustment both on the superintendent's side, and in this case, we will make the adjustment on the default budget, because the default budget was based on an assumption of 10%. So if it was 9, that number would have been a 9% increase. So we'll make that adjustment on both sides, and we've done that a couple of times.
My last
So we
question.
see the similar thing on the town side. We adjust
Right.
based, we have a forecast, and then we get the final number in the December timeframe generally, and you see an immediate change, and the governing council decides what to do with it.
That's my last question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Peter, do you see the town on a default budget where we're totally different, because you're by kids and numbers, your numbers drop up and down anyways. Of course, the budget's always there the same, and you go by whatever money comes in from the state. But now, do you see a default budget that, would affect, would be a major hit to the town, like it would be the school system?
Again, you're asking for my opinion again.
Yes, your opinion. You've been
Here's
around doing
my
this.
opinion. The school district hasn't just, an important entity, just no more, no better than the town. You gotta remember, the school district is what they call a single-purpose government. They do one thing. They educate the kids of Londonderry. A lot goes into it. Salaries, benefits, regular ed, special ed, transportation, athletics, music, band. But when all's said and done, we do one thing. We provide education, co-curricular activities for the youth of Londonderry. On the town side, you've got police, totally different than fire, public works, code enforcement, so forth, and so forth and so on. And as an individual, if you're asking me my opinion, that's where, if you're asking me my opinion as a citizen, where the difference between the school being able to go in and say, okay, $60 million, do I think that's an appropriate number for the education and all the co-curricular for the school district? Okay, yes, it is. No, it isn't. But in the town, for example, I'll get back to my little thing. I wouldn't be able to go to town meeting and get the white lines from my father. I could probably do it at public hearings, but again, you got 4, 5, 6 different purposes on the town, each totally separate of each other. The public works, totally different function than the police, than the fire, than building and code and whatever. And as a citizen, that's the one piece that I have a hard time dealing with going to the official ballot for the town. I think it works fine for the school, because you're simply saying 60 million for education. God bless them, because, you know, I couldn't figure out special ed any better than anybody else. I trust the school board. They've done with it, it's one thing. But you got a variety of issues in the town that get addressed.
So the corollary to that, Peter, is that you came to a town meeting on a Saturday morning and presented a change.
Correct.
You have opportunities to present that change other than public sessions, public hearings. You can submit your
I
own
could have.
petition.
Yep, yes, I did.
Right, so there's other types of
Oh,
ways
yeah,
to do it
I
as
just
well.
used it.
I just didn't want anybody to lose sight of the fact that there's other ways to do it.
One last one, because it brought up.
Yep.
Under your deliberative session, since you need a 500 quorum, but if somebody comes forward under the SB 2 with a 25 signature petition, say to draw white lines in front of the school, if the quorum's not there, does that petition go forward as a budgetary item on your school because nobody's there to change that petition?
Yeah, if it's a petition article, by law, we're no different because we have a charter, that would be a warrant article on the ballot that would be voted up or down.
Okay, can the school committee make changes to that, or it has to go forward with the 25? Okay, thank you.
Peter, you were saying the school's one, so Sue, this is gonna be both of you. School has one purpose, educating the kids, the town has 5 different purposes. What does this mean when you think of the town going to default? You're gonna have police, fire, public works, overtimes, all these things where you're not going to be able to draw like we do now in saying, well, maybe overtime is reduced. If you have a bad year of overtime, that's gonna stay in the default, that will always be part of the default. So would that escalate the budgets on the police? A default budget would escalate the police and fire budgets much faster than the current method of how we're doing budgets now?
If I understand what Peter said earlier, it's based on what's appropriated, not necessarily what's spent.
So,
So if we.
So if there was budget shifting,
Correct, so if we save $75,000 in a line, it's still what's appropriated. Likewise, if we overspend by 200 because it's a bad year, it's still what's appropriated. So that part should stay consistent.
okay. And Peter, on your side, the default, how much higher is the default usually? Because like to Al's example where he said, you're using 1,000, you stay open, you go to 1,050. The contract says next year I'm gonna be paying 2 cents a kilowatt. You can't assume that you're gonna use less. You have to budget exactly for those 1,050 at 2 cents.
Right, that's what.
Whereas the superintendent's budget has flexibility to do that. And so when the school board, but the general public has no say, well, we do, but we really don't, because it's the 5 people up here that make the final decision what goes. Then we get to the deliberative session, if there's no quorum, it goes with what the 5 people wanted, or the default. And if the people come in and they say, well, I don't like what the school's cutting in the school board's budget because they're gonna cut the band program, so I'm gonna vote, or they're cutting my favorite teacher, I'm gonna vote for the default budget, we're stuck with the higher budget.
Right. Keep in mind, this default, the official ballot, if I'm wrong with my dates, let me know. The official ballot was adopted 95, 96, am I right? You around there?
Correct.
Right? And that was a time when southern New Hampshire was escalating. The towns were growing, more kids were coming into the school district. The budgets in people's eyes were going up astronomically. And they felt, or some people felt, that a default budget was a mechanism to slow the increase in the budgets around. What's happened is, here's us, for example, we're in now, at best, maintaining enrollment. In fact, we're dropping a little bit, but let's say we're maintaining enrollment, or if we're dropping. So the fall budget almost, to a certain degree, doesn't come into play for us because it wasn't designed to do a default budget for declining enrollments, declining staff. It was really designed, I know you got 200 more kids, but I can't afford what you want to spend for 200 more kids, so it's slowing it down, almost stepping it. So for us, we've had the operating budgets by the superintendent, who scrutinizes no different than David does on the town side. And we've been able to reduce the operating budget, proposed budget by Nate, lower than the calculated default budget because of staff reductions.
Can that be sustained?
It's sustained until enrollment flattens or turns and goes back up
Starts going
again.
the other way. So it's a safety valve. You can sustain for a period of time, and at some point, conditions will change. You can no longer sustain it, or you can choose to sustain it by lopping off wholesale programs. You could make those choices. Then if you decided to sustain it by lopping off wholesale programs, the townspeople could come in and vote for a default budget, which kept those programs intact. So it's really kind of plays a dual-natured type of thing in there.
But I think the default puts us at more risk in the sense that if people go in, back to the quorum thing, if somebody shows up and says, well, and the quorum's met, and a group, a handful of people walk in and they say, we want the school budget reduced by $1 million, and it passes at the deliberative and it goes to the ballot, and there's $1 million that have been taken off, people are gonna be like, well, I have no choice, I have to vote for the default budget because I don't agree with, or,
Yeah,
so I mean, it puts it at a point where it's one or the other.
It's always going to be one or the other.
Right, but I think a town meeting, a town government, town meeting, and which I've always wanted the school to go back to too, but I don't know if I don't think people will show up if we went back to that, because I don't think anybody really cares, to be totally honest, but you could just, the appropriations, I can see them just, if all I've got is the choice of what the school board or the town council's telling me, or a default budget, that really isn't much of a choice to me. I'm not saying that to be mean to the sitting, as
this
a
comment.
former, it's like, sometimes I don't agree with what they put in front, and we're stuck as citizens with one or the other.
One of our jobs is financial reporting. And to make the reporting and the budget process as clear as we can to people who don't do this every day. And so I actually like, even though it can be a pain, and it's probably a 4-day process, actually more than 4 days. When I say 4 days, if we just closed the doors and did this, it'd be a 4 or 5 day process of just doing the default budget. Well, what I like about it is someone can go in and go and look at it and say, okay, if we made no changes, no new programs, didn't delete any programs, just, like you said, recognize the contracts that we've already been voted, contracts, utilities, whatever, if we made no changes to the education process, that number is $60 million. Okay, so the superintendent is asking for 61 million. Okay, what new stuff are we asking for that would tail out somewhere close to $1 million? Nate? Well, the $1 million is because I want a new SPED program at here, and I want this, and we get to, let's say, 900 and something, close enough. Or the other way around, it's $60 million for the fall. School superintendent comes in at, where am I? 59.5 million. What are we cutting? I don't need as many teachers because of this. I don't need this program that we had for several years because the population has now shifted to that. So it gives the person the benchmark. If I do nothing new, didn't count on anything, kept everything exactly the same, the budget would be 60 million, okay? It's higher, what new stuff are you adding? If it's lower, what are you taking out? And to me, it gives the person who doesn't do this every day, like her and I, a guide as to what is going on. And I think that's a good financial tool for someone to go in and kind of get a picture of where we're going. On just a very high level, what are you adding, what are you taking out?
Questions out here? questions?
Yeah, can I ask Sue a question? Yeah. Sue, with your experience in the financing here that's going on with the default, and what goes on with one-time contracts and stuff in the town, what do you see a default? What could happen here in Londonderry if we were SB2 with a default budget and a regular budget?
I think it would be kind of like what Peter already said that we have. We just don't have, we would take our operating budget, we would add in our union contracts that passed. So it's the same as Peter. We would back out one-time expenses. We don't have a whole lot of one-time expenses. We segregate, we have a lot of, like Peter talked about in the beginning, we have a lot of special and separate articles. The cost to, the soft cost to build the fire station, $163,000, it's already separated. It's not part of our operating budget. We've already broken that out. If we didn't break that out, that would be a one-time cost. But we already segregate that at our Saturday town meeting. So for us, it would be our operating budget. We don't have a lot of one-time costs that we would back out. So we'd be adding our union contracts. We'd be making our adjustment for debt service. Like Peter spoke of already, we would add in our utility increases for our contracts for our utilities. I mean, so for us, it would be a little bit more basic than what Peter has to do.
Follow up, if I may.
Go ahead.
What I was trying to get at, so the ceiling's not gonna fall down on, if a default was passed, we'd still continue business as usual, just that those nice to have, what we wouldn't get, in a default versus a regular budgetary if that was passed, is that true?
So we're asking me my opinion?
Yeah, I'm asking because you're the duty expert. And
Learn well.
yeah,
Sorry.
you're the duty expert, and you're also, which I like, is a taxpayer of Londonderry.
Yeah. So you're asking me if the ceiling would fall down?
Right, if we did a default and we didn't have all that extra stuff on there, would that be a loss to the, would the ceiling drop, would we have to shut down?
Well, I think it's tough for me to answer in my opinion, because I don't really think that way since I work here, but I think a lot of the one-time expenses that people enjoy, maybe stuff like Pettingill Road, economic development, which is a big thing now, the fire station, which people feel is a need, that type of stuff would be taken away. Would the operations of the community, would we still go out and send the ambulance out to help people and send police cars out to arrest people and take your tax registration? Of course we would. So yes, we would still function in a day-to-day operation. Would we grow and take advantage of the benefits that we have from some of the one-time expenses?
How would those things be
It's
taken away?
Huh?
How would those things be taken away?
What thing?
Sue mentioned that certain types of one-time expenses, Pettingill Road, economic development, things like that come up once in a while, would be taken away if we were under a default budget. So I'd like to
Back
poke
up
on
one
that.
time. It would be backing out the one-time expenses. That would be a one-time expense.
So you'd back those things out, but if the town manager felt like that was a needed thing in the following year and the council agreed, that would appear on the budget.
But if it's a one-time, the following year it gets pulled out as a
But
default
it would be
calculation.
added in on the manager's budget or the council's budget, which would be what,
Right. Let me give you a scenario where I would say 2, 3, maybe 4-year consecutive default budgets could hurt. But let's say by the magic that we were able to develop all the land over by the airport, right, let's say in a 3-year period, and default budgets are passed 2 and 3 years, when the need for expanded fire or expanded police cars or expanded personnel because of the increased traffic or increased population or increased services up in that area all of a sudden came into play. Okay? If you go by default budgets, you wouldn't be able to meet those increases of services because you're basically providing the same level of service. That's where a default budget starts to become noticeable. Again, I go back to the era when population in schools were growing a couple hundred a year. Okay, if you had default after default after default, you get to the point where you wouldn't have 21 kids in the class, you'd be up 31, 32 kids in the class. If the economy's stagnant and nothing's growing or changing, defaults aren't really as tight, string tightening as they are if the economy is growing.
But you're presuming under that the only thing that would be passed would be the default budget.
I said 2 or 3 years of consecutive defaults at a time when let's say the whole thing got developed in a couple of years, and you have increased, and you had default budgets consecutively. You're right, that's what I think I said a couple of years in a row.
Yeah.
1 year,
1 year back or forth, no big deal. Yep.
Hi. Just a point, if we did have that situation and all those businesses did come into town, first off, we would be collecting an awful lot of money in tax revenue to be able to handle that. And you can adjust these things year to year, right? Is
adjust
that-
what?
What, like, you were saying that you'd educate the voters and say, look, the default budget is this, but we got this amount in reserves because of all the increased taxes, so this is where we're gonna go, is with this budget, and then if it doesn't pass at the voters, they can still come back, correct?
No.
For like warrants for the next year.
Well, they can do petition articles. What I'm saying
Yeah,
is.
petitions, that's
What
what I
I'm
meant.
saying is if the fall budgets were passed, a
Right,
period of 2 or 3 years.
and that's saying that the
At
people
a
voted.
time, right, the voters voted in the fall budget, at a time when some growth, whatever growth you want to call it,
Yeah,
that would start to have a effect on how the town government would operate.
right, no, I understand what you're saying. You're saying that, we're just gonna, keep the same amount of fire and police or
Right.
road monies, because like, what is it? One truck equals 84 cars on small roads, so you have a lot more wear and tear on the roads, so Janos gets this huge budget. But there would be money, if things were like that, the climate would be that there would be more money
Right.
because of taxes, and people's taxes would be,
Dropping.
well, I mean, the money wouldn't be coming out of their purse, it would be coming out of the commercial end of it. So therefore, the tax rate for them wouldn't really be affected, so when you're talking about voting for it, I couldn't see why they wouldn't vote for it. Do you know what I'm trying, to keep those businesses in town? I mean,
I mean,
do you understand, do you know what I'm trying to say? I mean,
I
I'm
know
not
what you're-
articulating it very well,
No,
but.
you are. No, I understand. The one thing that sometimes I wonder, and I don't mean to be silly, and feel free to laugh if you want, but I've never, in all the years that I've been doing this, and I'm sure Peter hasn't either, we've never seen a time where people say, because a big company or 10 big companies moved in over there, and they're paying more, I think as a taxpayer, I want my taxes to go up. Because now I want to hire more police officers and get more ambulances on the road. I think I'm ready for my taxes
Well, I'm
to
not
go up.
saying that they would pay it, it would
Well-
be the.
I think people still
Business.
kind of want to,
Well, that's what I'm saying. Their tax rate would stay the same because it would be being filled in. For example, if we wanted our tax rate in Londonderry to drop 10%, we would have to bring in 1 year, I don't know, 10 or 13 Home Depots to get that dollar amount to bring down the taxes. And theoretically, I can't even think of 10 to 13 businesses that size. But I'm saying, the numbers, your number would stay the same, and the other part of it would have been eaten up by the commercial or the businesses that you've enticed to come
I
in.
have to disagree with what you said, though, Sue, a little bit, because the fact that there were increased revenues from certain businesses coming to town has been used to sell projects,
yes.
to sell buildings, to sell $14 million bond a few years ago, based on the promise of increased revenues from AES and land at the airport that still land at the airport. So, yeah, nobody does that because they want their taxes to go up. You know,
Right.
and I think when you look at it too, we got increased revenues, we spent some more money, the effective tax rate kind of dropped a little bit. So it's complicated. It's not necessarily one does the other, right? It's kind of complicated more than that, so. Al, you had a question?
Yeah, I was putting something, I was trying to find a school charter, but I'm sending a native note here. But anyways, my question was for Sue. The police cars, fire department, fire trucks, anything wouldn't even be affected with a default or on a budgetary issue anyways, because those are special articles, aren't they, to get those? And, it has nothing to do with the budget. It'll be added into the budget later, but those are separate if we buy that stuff.
Vehicles?
Yeah, say police vehicles, fire department stuff, putting money in that fund every year, separate articles.
Those are lease, so it's part of our operating budget. That's
So
part of our
that-
debt.
So
The
those
big
votes-
vehicles are,
Those trust fund votes, like for the equipment, that would,
capital reserve.
that would go into the default in the operating budget, or would they be
They're outside.
they would still stay separate?
Outside of they're outside the operating budget.
They are, okay.
Capital reserve is outside.
Right.
But our police cars are in.
What I was trying to say, because I understand our lease cars are already in the budget, so that will all stay, that's business as usual. Any new police cars, any new fire trucks would be a separate article anyways, is that true? What I'm trying to get, we could do it,
Well, it could be, or it could be part of the operating budget.
right, okay.
Depends on how
Go
they,
either way, right?
it depends on how the council wants
I
to
think
do
it's,
it.
I think it's a fair point to say, the fact that the town has capital reserves now for most of its equipment, and the police cars are leased, there's few items that you could say are truly one-time capital costs left on the town side. In the old days, when I first started, we didn't have the capital reserves or the trust funds. So the operating budget really would be affected by a default budget, because everything was in one budget. And slowly, I was able to pull out and define capital reserves and trust funds or whatever, and pull out the capital projects. Is that,
Thank you.
Any other questions? Chris?
You might have mentioned this already. Has the school ever had to use the default budget? Or is it something like, I mean,
I'm trying to think. I don't think we've ever used the default budget. I don't think we've ever, I don't
Well,
think that,
one year we voted in.
It was a dollar more.
We're a dollar less or something
Right.
like that than
It
the
was
default.
the library custodian.
think that was the
But it
one
didn't,
year.
but no one voted it in. In 7 years, no one's ever voted for the default budget.
right,
It's a pretty simple reason,
10 years.
well, 7 since I've been on the board, but yes, more than, the reason nobody votes for the default budget is it's higher. You're presented with two numbers. You're presented with 60 million, and if you don't like, the board recommended 60 million, then you can vote for 60.5 million.
But see, what I don't,
is that the case with the town too? We've never had to resort to the default budget?
We don't have one.
You don't
Oh, we don't
have,
have
We
it?
don't have one. But I think if you look mathematically at what's been approved over the last several years, and if you recalculated that based on a default budget, you'd probably see we're right in line with what's going on in the school district. So it's no appreciable swing one way or another. The council has made a point over the last 6 years of asking for a default budget to be presented in the numbers to do exactly what Peter talked about, using it as the benchmark, to look at where we were at. And often we've come in, the actual budget approved by the vote, put in front of the voters has come in below that. Sometimes more than the council intended, because on the floor of town meeting, there were people who got up and asked for reductions, so.
well, the
Steve?
department head kind of thing is
Yep.
the default budget.
That's a great point that he just brought up, and that caused me to think about this. On the school side, we have very limited revenue accounts. Our revenue accounts are what the taxpayers give us for funding,
yeah,
what the state decides to give us for funding,
and then small local.
and then some small, particularly today with no growth in our residential community, we don't have any impact fees coming in. But on the town side, and I guess this question is, I'm looking for how would it affect it if we were to switch our form of government? On the town side, you have other fees that come in. You have auto registration fees, you have, dog licensing fees, and then there's trust funds like cemeteries and sewer, and, that would be kept separate. But for those that are commingled, your revenue accounts, the biggest one I can think of is auto registrations. Because Brian's statement that you're running very close on the town to what we do in the school, when you look at a simulated default budget, but that's the budget, and what about the revenue? How does the revenue that you bring in affect that default budget. One year you may have, this year it appears people are starting to buy cars again, so that your number will be higher on the revenue on car registration fees. Last year it was lower. So what effect does that have if we switch to a default?
I don't think we would have any effect, because a lot of our revenue, like Peter talked about, we have a lot of different businesses, I guess, if you will. Their main focus is to educate children. Ours, each one has a different function. So the police department has their own expenses, and they bring in their own revenue source, such as false alarms and parking tickets and court fees. Fire brings in ambulance revenue. Regardless of what kind of budget passes, if we get 3,000 calls for service, we have to go and transport, and we get the revenue for that. Whether the number, if we get an influx of people and now it goes up to 5,000, we still have to do that regardless of what the budget is. We still have to show up when the phone rings. So I don't know that we would be adjusting our revenue budget based on what sort of expenditure budget passed, whether it was default or not.
So
How could you figure
certain impact fees, though, don't, you mentioned impact fees, certain impact fees don't get calculated into that because they're spent mostly as one time. Like if you look at the recreation impact fees, the lights that we put up at Laffa Fields, that was a one-time decision. The Project Play donation was a one-time decision.
Yes, if we.
So there's been a reduction, there's been no building really going on anywhere, so there has been a huge fall off in impact fees.
Yeah, so if we had an expenditure for recreation impact fees to put up lights,
Yep.
and we had to remove that one-time expense, we would remove that one-time revenue, the offsetting revenue for the impact fees for the lights as well. So the net effect would come out to zero, because we'd remove the expenditure and the revenue.
So I have a-
But there are other types of impact fees that might affect spending in other parts of the budget. Police and fire, you have some impact fees that affect that, so you
Right.
just don't
Right
spend
now-
for those items, or you,
Our impact fee revenue for police and fire are going to pay off the bonds. So, I mean,
so
recreation,
that's,
same
well,
with
that's a
library.
great point, though, because
library
it's a
bonds.
revenue source that, the impact fees are going to pay off the bonds.
Yes,
Impact fees have fallen.
Yep.
You still have to make those debt service payments.
correct.
So that has an effect on the tax rate,
Tax rate, not necessarily the budget, because the budget,
not the budget, but the
But the tax
tax
rate.
rate.
Yep.
So there are impacts.
So
Kathy?
Peter, when you guys do the default budget, so I can get, I think this is where the revenue question for clarification. This year, you guys knew you weren't gonna get any impact fees. It had no effect on the default budget at all.
the fall budget is based on the current year budget, plus or minus contractual obligations.
Okay,
The tax rate is affected because the budget, the fall budget was gonna get the 61 million regardless if you have impact fees or not, if that's the number.
okay.
If we have impact fees, I can offset 61 million by $500,000 of impact fees. I don't have impact fees, so the $61,000 doesn't get offset, so the property tax picks up the tab. That's the only revenue source we have.
So if we had a default budget in place and automobile registrations doubled, that money would go to offset the tax rate? Or would you put it into the general fund?
Well, it would go into the general fund, but it would eventually be an increase to our fund balance, which ultimately would help.
You'd be on designated funds, right?
Okay, but see, and that's a major difference, though, between the town and the school. On the school side, if we were operating in a default budget situation and we had extra revenues, those revenues must, or we didn't expend expenses, we didn't spend money, they must be returned to the taxpayer.
So is that a difference in school law versus,
We're not allowed to carry a fund balance.
that's a school law issue, though, right?
Yeah.
Whereas we can carry a fund balance.
One question for you, Sue, from me. So, under the presumption that the Charter Commission said yes to putting forward a recommendation to the voters and the voters approved it, what do you see changing about how the town does business? I mean, crystal ball, do you see anything changing about the way the town does business currently under a default, under SB2? Do you see any hardships? Do you see any difficulties? Do you see anything that gets easier? I know it's a little bit more work to put a budget together, but it's a few days' worth of work. So is there any particular thing that you see?
I would say, if I can talk for Susan for a second, I would say the difference is, again, I'll go back to when there's a particular issue that a group of people want to get out, whatever that is.
Yeah.
It's a lot easier to get them to show up at town meeting because it's the final vote. People know that it's town meeting, we're voting on stuff. My taxes can be affected one way or another, or public safety can be affected one way or another, or it'd be great to get this thing done or something. The finality of town meeting has weight than, as you say, nobody goes to the public hearings in January because I can just wait till, like I did. I just waited at the town meeting.
Yeah.
And instead of trying to get 5 or 7 or whatever the number of people here, you talk to what's called the legislative body behind.
So that's an impact to an individual. What about to the business?
I mean, I think, and Peter kind of summed this up before, we enjoy doing what we do, so for us, there's no pain on our side putting it together, because that's what we like to do all day, as strange as that may be for some.
I
Business-wise,
dodged finances.
business-wise, we're still gonna carry out what's voted from the taxpayers, so we're still going to make it work, however it needs to come out. We're still gonna open up, we're still gonna educate kids, or send police cars on the road and ambulances, we're still gonna do what we have to do. It seems like the impact more, as Peter just said, is more of a political issue than it is
Operational.
an operational issue, because whether the budget is 60 million and 30 million, or it's 65 million and 35, or 55 and 25, we're still gonna operate every day. We're still gonna open up, we're still gonna be open for business. It's more, how do people feel about being able to rise or lower their budgets at the floor town meeting versus not being able to have that opportunity?
Next question down here.
Under the SB2 budgetary, I mean, like, for instance, I'm gonna throw out a couple of projects here, like, let's use Exit 4A. We haven't bonded that, even though the voters voted for it, $5 million project, but yet with town's already spent over $500-something thousand. On the Pettingill project, we probably spent maybe, engineering fees, and I don't even remember voting on that, but we spent about $500,000 so far, whatever, from my hearing. With the SB2 budgetary, does that stop the town manager or anything, any of these projects going on where, will they still be able to use money that's sitting in the general fund for these other projects? Or does that have to be in
Well, I
the
would think
budget?
like 4A, that'd be a bond authorization.
Right.
So that doesn't affect the general.
What I'm trying to say is the bond was never pulled, but we're still taking money out of the general fund for these, that's not in the budget. And just like the
You're pulling
Pettingill
money.
project, we're taking money out of the general fund. Will that stuff under SB2 budget
Hold on
have
a
to be?
second. You're not pulling money out of the general fund for 4A.
We got a bond anticipation note of that $5 million.
We haven't bonded
We-
yet.
We, out of the 5 million that was approved, we borrowed essentially, if you will, 500,000 of that 5 million that was approved to
Okay,
pay
so
for those expenditures. So we're not taking it from any other source.
So it's
We're
not a-
borrowing-
forget about the bond, then I thought we
Okay.
didn't do the bond, we didn't actually take the bond out yet.
We
And
haven't
how about
taken-
like on these other projects where we're taking money out, the general fund to do,
Good.
that's not on budget, does it have to be on the
For
budget?
example, let's use that. Janos and Andre need $200,000 for engineering site work to determine what the interchange needs to be.
Mm-hmm.
Let's use that. If it's not a special article, if it's in Janos's budget, he's asked for that.
Right, he can do it.
Okay? If the default budget were to pass, that $200,000 new request for that project wouldn't happen.
Okay, I understand. I was just trying to get on some of the stuff, the way the town has been doing business here. Will that stuff have to be put on the budget, or will they continue to be able to do stuff like Pettingill and
Some
other
of those things will end up being council or town manager directed decisions, and it would be, in like this case, that could go on as a special warrant article.
Right.
Seeking the additional
I put it in the
funding.
operating budget for this purpose.
Or the council could put it into the budget that they wanted the the council's budget that goes in with the default budget. So a lot of those things get to be political decisions as well as to what the council's willing to do or not willing to do.
Okay.
So there'd be a whole host of those things, because what I see is the impact from somebody who sat up here is that it changes the way the council has to view the decisions they're making. And that's really it. I mean, they can make decisions, you know, that sometimes might be politically painful to make, and some people will get angry at them, but if it's the right thing to make, they have to make it that way. If they're worried about people getting angry, then they really shouldn't be up here. So, anybody else have any other questions? I think we're good. I'd like to thank both of you for coming. I think this has given us a lot of good information, solidified some things and educated us to where, you know, we can go forward with the next phase of the meetings, which will be to invite more folks in to talk about it. And we'll ask them opinions as well, you know, and I know that, you know, puts you on the spot a little bit to offer an opinion, because it's certainly something that, you know, you feel strongly about either way. I think, you know, you both do a great job, you both serve the town and the school district well, and I don't know where we'd be without you, because it's a professional staff that helps everybody else keep this thing running. So I'd like to thank you for taking your time tonight to come.
You get any questions like, oh, I should have asked this? You know how to find us.
Yeah, we'll be doing that. We are collecting questions as we go. Some of them are going to the town attorney, some of them, yeah, might come back and ask you to clarify something you said. As we think about it, we keeping a list.
Been very helpful, thank you.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Next thing we have on our agenda is approval of minutes. Oh, I like that, we're right on time. Do we have any comments for the minutes? Have a motion to approve?
Make a motion to approve.
I'll second that.
Motion made and seconded. Any discussion on the minutes?
She did a good job on them.
All right, seeing no discussion, all those in favor of approving the minutes of our meeting of April 26th signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstained? Minutes are approved. Any other business?
I have a question.
Yeah.
To put on your list that came up during this discussion. And I don't think Sue was the right government person to ask. Just curious on the number of absentee ballots that we now do. Because that's come up a few times on how town meeting is affected, because not everyone can come to the town and vote.
I could have sworn last one was like 60 or something,
Yeah.
but I'd be interested to find out, yes, or more.
Yeah, I'll go back
I
to my
mean, even
notes
if
and
it's
look.
one, you know, that's important, but it would be interesting to know the number,
Yeah, that's
depending
a Meg.
upon whether it's a presidential year or not.
That's a Meg Seymour question, we'll get that from Meg.
Matter of fact, if there's a way that you can get like like you said, presidential one, but then an off year.
Yeah.
You get an idea for like a 4 or 5, how many? And then also because we're really concerned with the March elections, right?
Yeah, there's no presidential though in the March.
No.
election.
Well, it would be,
But it'd be nice to balance it, what, in November versus March.
or to see what the percentage, what the ratio is, if,
It's huge in March, I mean, in November versus March.
Oh, yeah.
It's like 300 or 400, I think.
We count a
but
lot
if it's
of
300 or
them.
400 and you
Count a
got
lot of them in
10,000.
November, we don't count that
I
many.
mean, there's
if
like
it's
a
300 or
little
400
box this big in March, and there's like boxes in November.
But if it's 300 or 400 in November and you have 10,000 showing up, and it's 60, and you've only got 1,400 showing up, that 60 is a pretty big number.
You know, Brian, another thing too, I'd be interested, when we get DRA, and I'm asked that question, concerning when I asked before about the RSA pertaining to the budget committee, where we have elected budget committee, and why aren't they, like some other towns at their budget, are doing a separate budget versus the default budget?
Because it's the charter structure of
I
an
know it was a
advisory
charter, but-
versus an official budget committee.
what are the pros and cons of that there? I
We
mean,
can't change that.
Yeah.
No, I know that, but I'd be interested to find out on what the benefit of that is on a, you know, an SB two, because of, we have elected budgetary.
But if we're getting close on time now,
Huh?
if we're getting close on time, that's something out of our
Yeah.
realm.
That's part of SB two, actually, on the budgetary under the RSA, chapter 40.
Are you saying having a budget committee, like a separate budget, so we'd have, you know, the regular budget,
Versus
a
the
default
default.
budget, and a
The
budget
budget,
committee budget as well? I don't think I've seen that.
Well, the official budget committee changes the entire way it works.
And I think
And
that's,
and invokes, there's the 10% rule it invokes where, no matter how it happens, if it's a deliberative session or if it's a school board session, people can't come in and make more than a 10% change if there's an official budget committee.
and that's under the
Because
SB
they've
two.
elected a committee specifically to do budgeting for them. So they're not allowed to change what they do more than an X 10%. So there's all kinds of changes.
That was the question I wanted clarification from the lawyer, because that's part of the budgetary, under SB two also.
Yeah, I think that's on the list.
Right, under, I think, 40,
Attorney
colon
questions.
13.
But then if somebody doesn't do a job that was elected, you can hold them accountable and not elect them again,
Well, that's the case all the time.
Yeah.
You don't elect them again, you can recall them.
Huh?
You can also recall them.
Oh, you can?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, if you put it in the charter that way. But some of those things are outside of the purview of what we have.
They're always good things to look at. It's always good to look.
Anything else?
Motion adjourned.
Yeah,
No,
real quick,
Reed wants to
I have a question.
I'm sorry, that's
Oh, that's right.
Reed's coming.
Chris?
A question for maybe the DRS,
DRA?
or DRA. Can we specify, so, say we go, you know, with the SB2, can we specify how the budgets are reported? I mean, because there's been a lot of discussion about default versus not default, and he'd made a comment that, you know, like one-time expenses aren't itemized. So can we just say that if we go that route and we have a budget, you know, that it details each of these expenses, and that's what it is, here's the one-time, here's the general fund, here's the this, I mean, can't we have that? And then, based on that, make the informed decision? I mean, I don't know if we can, or if, you know, if that's a town council function, but if you want to go look at the budget, it seems to me that if it's not itemized and it's not in there, we should be able to look at that.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think that's something that, can we write that into the change?
Exactly.
And if we, and, so that's the question, is it
Yes, can we
eligible,
write
is
it
it
in?
eligible for something that we decide to write into the change?
Exactly.
So that would be. Reed?
Reed Clark, Stonehenge Road. Is May 24th another informative meeting like
Yes,
these two?
yes.
So the next meeting where we can talk will be
Reed, you
like
can-
June 6th?
You can raise your hand, talk at any of these if you'd like.
No, I mean,
The June 6th meeting will more than likely be a meeting to discuss outlining our report. We have the major duty of this commission that I feel as one commissioner is how we write this report. We need to provide, you know, we've been doing a lot of these types of meetings specifically to gather information. And we have to decide what we're going to do with that information and come up with an outline, and we have to ask volunteers to step forward to write those sections up. So that's something that we'll be getting into in the June meeting. And then shortly after that, I don't think we have any other guests that we're looking for, except maybe one more meeting with the attorney to come back, which we'll do in public session, where we will have like our final list of questions and things answered. Then we will take a vote. And
okay, so there won't be another public session where thousands of people will come and say what they think about.
I guess maybe I should ask the commission, what's the commission's pleasure on holding another public hearing before we take a vote?
I thought we were.
I thought we already
I
did
thought that was
that.
on the schedule for, toward the,
Yeah.
right after we took the vote and published, our preliminaries, or either that or right after the vote to get the public input on our. thought
On
we
our
were gonna do that.
report, yeah.
Yeah, I did too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
on the report, but we don't actually pin the report until we take a vote.
I think Kathy brought up last time, the meeting, that when we're going, like what we did, that the public can come up and ask questions and all that, like a public hearing. And I think you said you were gonna give everyone an opportunity,
Yeah,
that we're
if-
talking about.
Yeah,
So
just,
you can come up, you could have come up tonight if you had questions.
I just need to see a hand raised, so I know that you want to come up.
If you had questions of Sue and Peter.
Oh, no, the questions, it's not that. I'm looking at the,
Crowd?
Reed, if the
Crowd.
if the thousands of people were here, we'd figure out how to accommodate letting them talk, yeah.
and in order to, I mean, I also have grandchildren graduating on May 24th, so that's another thing, but you have to give some 2 weeks' notice or something for a public hearing, right?
Yes, we have to post it properly.
Yeah.
So I know that we had talked, in our schedule, we had talked about
I think we have to have a public.
having the public hearing on our report before we submitted it.
Yes, that's
I
correct.
think we have to.
Well, and
Yeah, that's.
we don't, actually. We only require to have one public hearing, and we've already had it. So,
I thought we said we were
but we
gonna-
decided that we would do that. My question is a little bit different than that. Based on some comments that Reed made, do we want to have a public hearing before we take our vote? We've had a lot of discussion. We've got a couple more guests
If we
coming.
don't need a public hearing, I don't, unless we want to phrase it a public hearing, I don't care, the public can.
I would
These
recommend.
have all been public
Okay,
hearings, I
right,
mean, it's not.
so, I mean, if we need to call it a public hearing, then we'll call it a public hearing, but personally, I don't care if the public comes and talks at every meeting.
Yeah.
If I may, I would recommend that you do publish a, official public meeting before, and let, that way there be in the newspaper, people, one last chance to come in and have a say. And then when it's over and done, when anyone asks us, hey, why'd you do that? Well, we gave you an opportunity many times to come here and speak.
Yeah, but see, but,
Right, Reed?
I mean, I
Right.
don't know, if by law, we don't need more than one public hearing, then why have public hearings? Just tell the public to come.
Yeah, there's, I mean,
Why
I'm
incur the
ambivalent. I'm ambivalent.
of a public hearing too?
Yeah, the expense is posting the notices, so. I'm ambivalent either way, I just put it out to everybody else.
Every meeting's a public hearing then?
Every meeting is
It's
a public
hearing.
session.
Right,
Public
public
session,
says,
there you go.
We're having them in public, and we agreed that if there were people here who wanted to speak, we'd let them speak.
Yep.
So we're running on that as our modus operandi.
So on June 6th, I mean, I won't be here on the 24th, so on June 6th, if I come in, whether it's advertised or not, I can still burn your ears, right?
Yes, you can.
He can burn our ears now if he wants.
No, no.
You have Brian's phone number.
Yeah, you have my phone number. You have
I
my
am
email.
so, I don't understand why Polly and I are the only ones here. I have no idea why.
You've no idea why?
Yes. I mean, I know why.
Anything else would be my opinion.
I have my opinion, but, from the way it was advertised, the way it's supposed to be advertised, 2 people show up. That doesn't
Well,
make sense to me.
Are you saying that we're not advertising it properly?
it's to the default budget.
I have no idea.
Okay.
The cable's-
Because we're following the
There are
guide,
2 people here.
we're following the guidelines, they're all posted, they're all on calendars, they're mentioned in the papers, they're mentioned in blogs around town, and people don't show up, which in 6 years of sitting up here, it's really kind of not any different than what I've experienced in the past.
What you experienced in the past, in 6 years of being counselor, was
No way to tell.
individual things were being talked about. Here you're talking about a change of the whole system, which is very different from the
Run-of-the-mill meeting.
run-of-the-mill meeting, right, exactly. And I think that changing a system should draw more attention than two people. I'm sorry, I think there's three. Just,
Including you.
Steve?
The problem is, and I'll put it in my world in the school board, that this board has such a narrow focus on what it's capable of doing. We really can't pick out anything that is going to get someone to storm the castle. On the school board, we could cut the football team, we could cut the band program, we could put 35 kids in every classroom in the elementary school, and we could fill the room. The problem here is, I don't think there's a particular item that we could select, a bomb that we could drop, that would get people to come here. Because the issue is, will we or won't we change the form of government that Londonderry has practiced for the past centuries?
or 2 or 3 centuries.
For the past century.
Okay.
Or 13 years, depending on how you count.
Nobody cares.
95, you mean, yeah.
Nobody cares.
Nobody cares.
Well, in the first place, 1995 was the biggest mistake that was ever made.
It's
But, I mean,
opinion.
That's true.
me, my opinion.
Which decision was that? The decision of the
The
school board to go
SB2
one way
for
or the
the-
council to
for
go
the
the
school
other?
board.
I mean, that's the thing.
For
It's
the
all,
school board is,
We're not changing that. All we're doing is changing.
I know you're not changing it. I said that was the first big mistake, is
I mean,
passing
Al,
that.
you had a question?
Yeah, right, actually, an answer to Reed. Reed, I can tell you, as somebody who is an elected official here that get many phone calls, and the reason I think why there's a lot out here, Steve's been voted by the people, I've been voted, many others have been on here. A lot of people say, Al, you're my voice. I don't need to come up there and get involved. You're speaking for me. And the same thing on the school board or in other areas. Many people do come up to the State House, but I get hundreds of phone calls. I can't even keep up with them on issues up there at the State House, and there people are just, say, you're my voice for me. So I'm wondering if maybe that's the same thing here, thinking we've been voted as commissioners to look into this for the people, and maybe that's the reason why. Apparently there's confidence in our Fidelity's abilities to do what they want, and hopefully in the right direction.
I, for one, can say I haven't gotten hundreds of phone calls about it.
No, I'm not, no, I haven't got a lot of calls on this. I'm saying I do on many other issues as an elected official, as a state rep.
That's, I mean, we could go on and
My
on
email,
about that.
I'm 1,200 behind.
Okay.
Funny.
Brian, Pauline had her hand up.
I see her, I'm gonna call her up. We could go on and on about why there's nobody here, I mean, why there's
that,
nobody here.
all right.
It's just,
So,
there will be other opportunities for people to come and speak. We have this room booked every 2 weeks until the middle of August.
okay,
And then we'll take a little bit of a breather, and then we'll have our final couple of meetings to finalize our reports and submit them.
okay. So you won't vote until at least
Until we
time I
hear
get
from you
back.
again?
Till I get back.
Yes, definitely, Reed, you've got
I think
plenty
Ray
of
just made a
time.
motion.
Well, I think we actually might have to vote. If you don't come back, we have to go ahead and vote anyway.
Oh, darn.
So you can't use that, if that was your
24th.
strategy, if that was, no, we
Never
won't be
come
voting
back.
on the 24th.
How did
20
the
24th
town
is the-
function when you were working in Washington DC and missed that many town meetings? How did they function here without
They
Pauline, you had a,
video?
When I was in Washington, all you could do was vote for the president.
We have video now.
Yeah, no town meeting, nothing
Definitely,
like
Pauline.
that.
We're gonna be
That's
going
why I
all night.
voted up here.
You better get up there so you
Get you
get
on
in.
video, Skype.
we do that with Bob Lincoln. We get him on video to come in campaign.
Uh-oh, he's telling me to shut up.
No, I'm not.
No.
Pauline Karen, 369 Mammoth Road. The question I have is, are you going to have town council here at a meeting before you make your preliminary report?
Town attorney?
Town attorney, is what
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
to answer the questions.
Yes, we have a list now, I think, with a couple that are added to it tonight, we're up to about 14 or 15 questions that we'll send them all to him in advance.
Okay,
Get his
that was my
answers
only
back, and
question.
we'll be inviting him back.
Thank you. You can continue, Reed.
No,
Chris, you had your hand?
I shall return.
On June 6th.
I mean, I know that this is kind of an informal way that we, go through the meeting, but I mean, is there someplace in the agenda that we need to put in, you know,
Public comment.
public comment?
We can put that in or not. I think we
I mean, I know that
decided
they can-
not to at a prior meeting, I think, so
Yeah,
all it takes is, you know, somebody to raise their hand and recognize that they're wanting to speak, we let them come forward.
I think all of us just try to remember when, like, so when Peter's here, when we're all done, say, is there anybody in the public that has a question?
Yeah.
So that way we'll all knock each other to remember to get the two, well, maybe we'll have 4 people or 5 people next time in the room a chance.
Well, we had one gentleman stay for a while then leave. He must have been, see, maybe he was satisfied with what he was hearing,
Or maybe he was just,
or disgusted, I don't know.
or figured, this is boring,
He didn't give us any kind of particular indication as he
what
was
he was
leaving.
here
so
for. Maybe he was just here to observe.
He might have thought this was a rec commission meeting or something. So, I don't-
Yeah, that was a.
Anything else, anybody?
So the next.
Motion
meeting
to the 24th.
2 weeks. The 24th.
is Motion to,
You
Motion
made
to
it now,
adjourn.
and then you got shut down, so make it now. Your
motion
motion.
to adjourn, let's make it happen.
Do I have a second?
second.
Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Aye.
Hey,
Opposed?
Alfred.
Abstained?
Happy, get it?
Motion carries, we're adjourned.
No, I don't have any discussion.